First Contact and Crisis. The crystalline spires of the Aetherian Environmental Control Center sparkled in the alien sun, their surfaces dulled by a thin layer of crimson dust. Dr. Sarah Chen stood at the observation deck, her breath caught in her throat as she watched the massive atmospheric processors struggle to maintain their rhythm. The machine's usual smooth hum had developed an ominous stutter that even her untrained ear could detect. Your civilization achieved space travel, yet you cannot even maintain stable atmospheric conditions. The words came from Vera, the Aetherian chief engineer, her translucent skin flickering with patterns of disapproval. The alien's tall, willowy frame towered over Sarah, but the human scientist refused to be intimidated. Sometimes the simplest solutions are overlooked when you're too focused on complexity, Sarah replied, her dark eyes fixed on the failing processors. The Aetherians had called for help after their atmospheric maintenance systems began to degrade, but their pride made accepting human assistance nearly impossible. Commander Jackson, head of the human delegation, stepped forward. His weathered face reflected decades of diplomatic experience. We've handled similar challenges on Earth. Different scale, different technology, but the same principles apply. Vera's skin rippled with what Sarah had learned to recognize as skepticism. Your planet still struggles with environmental balance. What could you possibly teach us? The human team had arrived on Aetheria 3 days ago, responding to a distress signal that the Aetherians had broadcast with obvious reluctance. Their world, once a marvel of environmental engineering, was facing a crisis. The atmospheric processors that maintained their artificially created paradise were failing, and their highly advanced civilization couldn't determine why. Sarah pulled up a holographic display from her tablet, showing Earth's atmospheric composition. We learn through trial and error, sometimes catastrophic error, but that's exactly why we might see something you've missed. The Aetherian Council chamber filled with more of their kind, their skin displaying a rainbow of emotional patterns. Sarah had spent countless hours studying their bioluminescent communications, but still found herself struggling to read the subtle variations. Our systems have maintained perfect balance for 10,000 years, announced Elder Kyrax, his skin pulsing with authority. This anomaly is unprecedented. Sarah zoomed in on a particular section of the processor's diagnostic readout. That's exactly the problem. Your systems are too perfect. They haven't adapted to natural variations in your planet's geology and solar activity. The chamber erupted in flickering patterns of discord. The suggestion that their perfection might be a flaw seemed to offend their very core beliefs. Commander Jackson placed a calming hand on Sarah's shoulder, but she wasn't finished. Look at these readings, she continued, highlighting several data points. Your processors are fighting against natural atmospheric cycles instead of working with them. It's like trying to force a river to flow perfectly straight. Eventually, the pressure builds up and something breaks. Vera moved closer, her curiosity seemingly overwhelming her initial dismissiveness. Explain. Sarah brought up a comparison between Earth's atmospheric regulation systems and Aetheria's. We learned to work with our planet's natural rhythms. Your technology is far more advanced than ours, but it's working against nature instead of with it. That's why you're seeing cascading failures in the primary processors. The chamber fell silent, the Aetherians' skin patterns shifting to deep contemplative blues and purples. Elder Kyrax approached the holographic display, his long fingers moving through the data with practiced grace. You propose we intentionally introduce imperfection into our systems. The concept seemed to physically pain him. Not imperfection, Sarah corrected. Flexibility, adaptability. The same qualities that helped humanity survive on Earth, despite all our technological limitations. Commander Jackson stepped forward. We're not suggesting you abandon your technology. We're offering to help you modify it to be more resilient, to combine your precision with our experience in handling environmental chaos. The chamber filled with a soft humming as the Aetherians communicated among themselves in frequencies just beyond human hearing. Sarah watched their skin patterns shift and dance, trying to gauge their response. Finally, Vera turned to Sarah, her skin showing a pattern she hadn't seen before, a mix of resignation and curiosity. "Show us. But know that if you fail, our world's atmosphere will begin to degrade within 3 lunar cycles. The lives of millions rest on your primitive wisdom." Sarah met Vera's gaze steadily. Sometimes it takes an outsider's perspective to solve an insider's problem. "We'll need full access to your environmental control systems and historical data." "Granted," Elder Kirax announced, though his skin flickered with uncertainty. "But we will monitor every adjustment. One mistake, and our cooperation ends." As the human team began setting up their equipment, Sarah couldn't help but feel the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. They had to prove that humanity's hard-won environmental knowledge could help a civilization that had achieved near perfection. The irony wasn't lost on her. A species that had nearly destroyed their own planet's atmosphere might hold the key to saving another's. The real challenge, she knew, wouldn't be technical. It would be convincing the Aetherians to trust in a solution that went against everything they believed about technological progress. As she watched the crimson dust continue to settle on the crystal spires, Sarah wondered if pride might prove a greater obstacle than any engineering challenge. Commander Jackson's voice broke through her thoughts, ready to show them what humanity can do. Sarah nodded, her fingers already dancing across her tablet's surface, ready to show them that sometimes the best solutions come from learning from your mistakes. The atmosphere processors groaned in the distance, their rhythm growing more erratic. They had 3 lunar cycles to prove that humanity's primitive wisdom could save an advanced civilization from its own perfection. The clock was ticking, and a world held its breath. The human solution. The control room of Aetheria's central atmospheric facility hummed with tension. Sarah's fingers flew across the holographic interface as she studied the cascade of data streaming before her. 2 weeks had passed since their arrival, and the processor's condition had only worsened. "Your adjustments are causing further destabilization," Vera announced, her skin flashing warning patterns of deep red and orange. "The western quadrant's atmospheric density has decreased by 0.3%. "It's supposed to," Sarah replied without looking up. "We're allowing the system to find its natural rhythm." She'd spent days explaining this concept to the Aetherians, but their dedication to absolute control made accepting temporary instability almost impossible. The facility's massive viewing window revealed the sprawling Aetherian capital below, its crystal architecture now dulled by increasing atmospheric disturbance. Red dust swirled in complex patterns, occasionally obscuring entire sections of the city. Commander Jackson entered the control room, accompanied by Dr. Miguel Rodriguez, Earth's leading atmospheric systems engineer. "Tell me you have good news," the commander said, his expression grave. "I think I found it," Sarah said, expanding a particular section of data. "Look at these patterns. The system isn't just fighting natural variations, it's fighting itself." Miguel leaned in, his eyes widening. "Dios mío, it's like watching a machine have an autoimmune response." Vera's skin rippled with confusion. "Explain this comparison." Sarah pulled up a simplified visualization. "Your processors are so focused on maintaining perfect stability that they're treating natural atmospheric fluctuations as threats. Each processor is attempting to correct what it perceives as errors, but in doing so, it's creating new imbalances that other processors then try to fix. It's a feedback loop that's growing worse over time." "Impossible," Elder Kirax declared, entering the room with a delegation of Aetherian scientists. "Our systems are perfectly calibrated." "That's exactly the problem," Miguel interjected, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "When we first started developing Earth's atmospheric restoration systems, we made the same mistake. We tried to force absolute stability. It nearly caused a catastrophic collapse." Sarah brought up another display, this one showing Earth's current atmospheric management system. "We learned to work with natural variations instead of against them. Your processors need to breathe with your planet, not fight it." The Aetherian scientists exchanged complex patterns of light, their skin shifting through shades of doubt and curiosity. Elder Kirak stepped forward, his tall frame casting a shadow over the holographic display. "You propose we intentionally introduce chaos into our systems." His skin pulsed with disapproval. "Not chaos," Sarah corrected. "Natural variation. Think of it like a dance. Right now, your processors are trying to stand perfectly still. We need to teach them to move with the rhythm of your world." Commander Jackson watched the exchange with diplomatic patience. "Your civilization achieved incredible things by pursuing perfection. We achieved our survival by embracing adaptation. Perhaps there's wisdom in both approaches." Vera, who had been studying the data in silence, suddenly straightened. "The pattern corresponds with our planet's orbital variations. How did we miss this?" "Sometimes you need fresh eyes," Sarah said softly. "Eyes that are used to looking for imperfection." Miguel pulled up a simulation on his tablet. "We can modify your existing processors to work with these natural cycles instead of against them. It won't be perfect, but it will be sustainable." The room fell silent as the simulation played out, showing how the modified system would allow for controlled fluctuations while maintaining safe atmospheric parameters. The Aetherian scientists' skin patterns shifted rapidly as they processed the implications. "If we implement these changes," Elder Kirak said slowly, "how can we be certain it won't lead to complete system failure?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "We'll test it on a single processor first. The one in the Western Quadrant is already showing the most strain. It's our best candidate. And if it fails, then you'll have proof that we're wrong, and you can try something else." Sarah's voice carried a quiet confidence. "But it won't fail." Commander Jackson stepped forward. "We're not asking you to abandon your principles. We're offering a way to enhance them. Perfection doesn't have to mean rigidity." Vera's skin displayed a complex pattern that Sarah hadn't seen before, something between acceptance and hope. "I will oversee the modifications personally, but understand that if this fails, the consequences will fall on both our species." Sarah nodded, already pulling up the processor's control systems. "Miguel, we'll need to write new adaptive algorithms. Can you start on the base code?" "Already on it," he replied, his fingers dancing across his tablet. "We'll need to integrate their existing protocols with our variable response systems." As the team began their work, Sarah caught a glimpse of the red dust storms intensifying outside. They had less time than they'd initially calculated. The system was degrading faster than predicted. The human solution had to work, not just for the sake of Etheria, but for the future of interspecies cooperation. Elder Karax watched them work, his skin gradually shifting to a more contemplative blue. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "there is something to be learned from imperfection after all." The processor's deep thrum changed pitch as they began implementing the first modifications. Sarah held her breath, watching the readings carefully. Everything depended on this moment. The moment when human adaptability would either save or doom an alien world. The dance was about to begin. Trust and collaboration. The Western Quadrant's atmospheric processor towered above them, its crystal structure pulsing with new rhythms. A week had passed since the implementation of the human modifications, and the results were undeniable. The red dust storms had diminished, replaced by gentle atmospheric currents that danced through the Aetherian city. "The readings are unexpected," Vera admitted, her skin shifting through shades of amazement. "The processor's efficiency has increased by 30%, despite operating within wider parameters." Sarah nodded, watching the holographic displays show the smooth flow of atmospheric currents. "It's like teaching someone who's been holding their breath to breathe normally." The system isn't fighting itself anymore. The control room had become a curious blend of human and Etherian technology. Tablets and holographic interfaces merged seamlessly, much like the two species had begun to do. Miguel sat with a group of Aetherian engineers, their skin patterns mimicking his enthusiastic hand gestures as he explained Earth's atmospheric modeling systems. "Your solution is elegant in its simplicity, a young Aetherian scientist named Lyra said, her skin glowing with genuine admiration. We were so focused on maintaining absolute control that we never considered working with natural variations. Commander Jackson smiled diplomatically. Sometimes the best solutions come from unexpected places. Your technology combined with our experience has created something neither of us could have achieved alone. Elder Kirax entered the control room, his usual stern demeanor softened by the success they'd witnessed. The Council has reviewed the data from the Western Quadrant. They have approved the implementation of your modifications across all atmospheric processors. A ripple of excitement passed through both human and Aetherian teams. Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders, but she knew the hardest part was still ahead. We'll need to coordinate the transition carefully, she said, pulling up a global map of Aetheria's processor network. Each processor will need to be modified in sequence, maintaining overall stability while we introduce the new protocols. It will require precise timing, Vera added, her skin showing patterns of concentration. One miscalculation could trigger a cascade failure across the entire network. Miguel stepped forward, his tablet displaying a complex simulation. We've developed a transition protocol that should minimize risks. Each processor will adjust gradually, learning from the successful patterns of the others. The room filled with the soft hum of Aetherian communication frequencies as they studied the proposed implementation plan. Sarah had learned to read their skin patterns well enough to recognize the mix of anxiety and hope that rippled through the group. There's something else you should see, Sarah said, bringing up a new set of readings. The Western Quadrant's processor isn't just maintaining the atmosphere more efficiently, it's beginning to heal the environmental damage caused by the previous system's rigid control. The displays showed areas where natural atmospheric cycles were gradually restoring balance to Aetheria's ecosystem. Native plant species that had struggled under the artificial perfection were showing signs of revival. Lyra's skin pulsed with excitement. The ancient records speak of atmospheric patterns we haven't seen in millennia. Could they be returning? Your world hasn't forgotten how to breathe, Sarah replied softly. It just needed us to stop forcing it to hold still. Elder Karax studied the data with intense focus. The Council will want to understand the long-term implications. Will these changes continue to evolve? That's the beauty of it, Miguel explained. The new system learns and adapts. It will continue to optimize itself based on natural patterns we might not even recognize yet. Commander Jackson watched the exchange with quiet satisfaction. What had begun as a reluctant acceptance of human help had evolved into true collaboration. The Aetherians' initial skepticism of primitive human wisdom had transformed into genuine respect. We should begin the global implementation immediately, Vera announced, her skin displaying decisive patterns. I've assembled teams at each major processor facility. They're ready to begin the transition on your signal. Sarah looked at the assembled group, humans and Aetherians working side by side, their differences forgotten in the pursuit of a common goal. Then let's get started. Miguel, can you coordinate with the eastern facilities? I'll handle the northern quadrant with Vera. As the teams dispersed to their assigned positions, Commander Jackson pulled Sarah aside. You've done more than save their atmosphere, he said quietly. You've shown them that different approaches can coexist. That perfection can mean something new. Sarah watched as Lyra enthusiastically explained a complex atmospheric pattern to Miguel, her skin glowing with the joy of discovery. Maybe that's the real breakthrough here. Not the technology, but the understanding that we all have something to learn from each other. The processor's rhythm had changed from its original rigid pulse to something more organic, more alive. Outside, the Aetherian sky was clearing, revealing stars that had been hidden behind the red haze. It was more than just an engineering solution. It was a symbol of what could be achieved when two civilizations looked past their differences and worked together. As the global implementation began, Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction. They had done more than solve an environmental crisis. They had bridged two worlds, not just technologically, but culturally. And in doing so, They had created something truly perfect, a partnership based on mutual respect and understanding. The dance of adaptation had begun, and both species were learning new steps. The ultimate test. The warning alarms pierced the calm of the central control facility, their urgent tone cutting through the usual gentle hum of the processors. Sarah's eyes snapped to the main display as red warning indicators bloomed across the global network map. "Solar storm approaching," Vera announced, her skin flickering with emergency patterns. "Magnitude exceeds all recorded events in our history." Commander Jackson leaned over the display, his face illuminated by the pulsing warnings. "How long do we have?" 20 minutes until it hits the atmosphere," Miguel replied, his fingers flying across multiple interfaces. "The magnetic field disturbances are already affecting the processor network." The control room erupted into focused activity as both human and Aetherian teams moved with practiced precision. They had managed to implement the new adaptive protocols across 60% of the processor network, but the remaining facilities still operated on the old system. Elder Kirax swept into the room, his skin patterns showing barely controlled panic. "The Council demands to know if the modified processors can withstand this level of solar activity." Sarah studied the incoming data, her heart racing. "They're designed to adapt to natural variations, but this is beyond anything we simulated." "The old protocols would have failed completely," Vera interjected, her skin pulsing with determination. "At least now we have a chance." The massive viewing window revealed the Aetherian sky turning an ominous deep purple as the storm approached. Atmospheric currents began to swirl erratically, creating visible distortions in the air. "We need to make a decision," Commander Jackson said firmly. "Do we try to revert the modified processors to their original protocols, or do we trust in the adaptive system?" Sarah's mind raced through calculations and possibilities. Everything they'd worked for hung in the balance. "If we revert now, we'll create conflict between the modified and unmodified sections of the network. The whole system could tear itself apart." Miguel pulled up the latest readings from the Western Quadrant, their first successful modification. "Look at this. The adaptive processors are already responding to the approaching storm. They're adjusting their patterns to accommodate the increased solar activity." Vera's skin shifted to deep analytical patterns as she studied the data. "They're creating buffer zones, redirecting atmospheric pressure to protect the cities." "How did they know to do that?" "They learned," Sarah explained, a hint of pride in her voice. "The protocols we implemented don't just adapt to current conditions. They anticipate and prepare for changes based on environmental cues we might not even recognize." Elder Kirax watched the displays with growing concern. The unmodified processors are showing signs of severe strain. If they fail, the modified sections will be overwhelmed. "Then we modify them now," Sarah said decisively. "Miguel, how quickly can we implement emergency conversions?" 15 minutes per facility, minimum," he replied grimly. "We don't have enough time." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. They could only watch and wait, hoping that the adapted processors could compensate for their unchanged counterparts. "There is another option," Vera said suddenly, her skin displaying a pattern Sarah had never seen before, something between determination and fear. "We could shut down the unmodified processors completely. Let the adaptive network handle the entire load." "That's incredibly risky," Commander Jackson warned. "If the modified processors fail under the strain, we'll lose the entire atmosphere," Elder Kirax finished, his skin pulsing with anxiety. Sarah studied the network map, watching as the modified processors continued to adapt and adjust. They were already working together in ways she hadn't anticipated, creating complex patterns of atmospheric control that seemed almost organic. "They won't fail," she said quietly. "Look at how they're moving, how they're learning. This is exactly what we designed them to do: face the unexpected." The first waves of the solar storm began to hit the upper atmosphere, creating spectacular auroral displays that rippled across the purple sky. Warning indicators screamed as the unmodified processors began to malfunction under the stress. "We're out of time," Vera announced. "We must decide now." Sarah met Commander Jackson's gaze, then turned to Elder Kyrax. "Trust us. Trust what we've built together." The Elder's skin shifted through a complex series of patterns before settling into a resolve. "Do it." Sarah's fingers flew across the control interface, initiating the shutdown sequence for the unmodified processors. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Massive sections of the atmospheric control network went dark. "Modified processors responding to the change," Miguel reported, his voice tense. "Power consumption increasing. They're expanding their coverage to compensate." The room held its breath as they watched the adaptive network stretch itself to its limits. Outside, the storm raged with increasing intensity, battering the planet's atmosphere with waves of solar energy. "Look at this," Vera breathed, her skin glowing with amazement. "They're not just maintaining the atmosphere. They're using the storm's energy to strengthen it. The protocols are learning in real time." The displays showed an intricate dance of atmospheric control as the modified processors worked in harmony to protect their world. What had seemed like chaos was being transformed into a complex ballet of adaptation and response. Sarah watched as her creation exceeded every expectation, proving that the combination of human ingenuity and Etherian technology could achieve the impossible. The processors weren't fighting against the storm. They were working with it, using its power to reinforce their own patterns. As the storm reached its peak, the modified network held firm, its adaptive protocols creating new solutions to each challenge. The Etherian sky, rather than tearing apart under the solar onslaught, blazed with spectacular patterns of light and energy. They had done more than save a world. They had taught it to save itself. New Horizons, 1 month after the solar storm, the Etherian capital gleamed under clear skies that shifted between subtle shades of lavender and gold. The atmospheric processors, now all converted to the adaptive protocols, hummed with a harmony that seemed to resonate with the planet itself. Sarah stood in the Grand Council chamber, surrounded by both human and Etherian dignitaries. The chamber's crystalline walls reflected the emotional light patterns of the assembled Etherians, creating a dancing aurora of colors that celebrated their shared achievement. "What began as a crisis has become a revolution," Elder Kyrax announced, his skin radiating patterns of pride and gratitude. "Our world breathes again, not with the rigid control we once prized, but with a living rhythm we never knew it possessed." Commander Jackson stepped forward to address the assembly. "The success of this project represents more than a technological achievement. It stands as proof that our species can learn from each other, that our differences can become our greatest strengths." Vera, now appointed as Chief Director of Atmospheric Sciences, displayed patterns of enthusiasm as she brought up a holographic display. "The adaptive network continues to evolve beyond our initial projections. We've recorded the return of atmospheric phenomena, not seen since our ancestors first established the processor system. Ancient weather patterns are re-emerging," Lyra added, her skin pulsing with excitement. "And with them, dormant ecosystems are awakening. Life forms we thought lost to history are returning." The display showed time-lapse footage of the changes sweeping across Etheria. Valleys once choked with red dust now flourish with iridescent vegetation. Atmospheric currents carved new patterns in the sky, creating natural light shows that rivaled the Etherians' own bioluminescence. "We've received requests from 17 other worlds to study the adaptive protocols," Miguel announced, scrolling through his tablet. "The implications for atmospheric engineering across the galaxy are enormous." Sarah watched as human and Etherian scientists gathered around the technical displays, their differences forgotten in their shared passion for discovery. The initial barriers of pride and prejudice had dissolved, replaced by mutual respect and genuine collaboration. "There's something else," Vera said, her skin showing patterns of wonder. "The network's adaptive capabilities have begun to influence our own thinking. We're learning to see beauty in variation, strength and flexibility. Commander Jackson smiled. Sometimes the greatest innovations come not from pursuing perfection, but from embracing change. Elder Carax approached Sarah, his tall frame bowing slightly in respect. We once viewed your species as primitive, limited by your technological constraints. We failed to see that those very limitations forced you to develop solutions we could never have conceived. And we've learned from your precision, your attention to detail, Sarah replied. The best solutions come from combining different perspectives. The chamber's atmosphere shifted as Lyra activated a new display, showing the next phase of their collaboration. We're proposing a joint research institute, she announced, her skin patterns matching her obvious excitement. A place where human innovation and Etherian technology can continue to evolve together. The display showed plans for a massive facility, its architecture blending human and Etherian design elements. It would serve as a symbol of their partnership and a beacon for future cooperation between their species. The Institute will focus not just on atmospheric science, Vera explained, but on all areas where our civilizations can learn from each other. We've only scratched the surface of what we can achieve together. Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction as she watched the two species interact. What had started as an emergency response to a crisis had transformed into something far more significant, a bridge between two worlds, two ways of thinking. The Council has also approved an exchange program, Elder Kirax announced. We will send our scientists to Earth and welcome human researchers here. The time for isolation has passed. Commander Jackson nodded approvingly. This crisis showed us that no civilization, no matter how advanced, has all the answers. We're stronger together than apart. Outside, the adaptive processors continued their subtle dance with Etheria's atmosphere, their rhythm a constant reminder of what could be achieved when different approaches worked in harmony. The red dust storms that had once threatened their world had been replaced by gentle breezes that carried the promise of new life and new possibilities. Perhaps, Sarah mused, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors she had never seen before, perfection isn't about absolute control. Maybe it's about finding the right balance between stability and change, between tradition and innovation. As the chamber filled with the combined light of human achievement and Etherian gratitude, Sarah realized they had created something truly unique, a partnership that would continue to evolve and adapt, just like the processors that now maintain their world. The dance would continue, and both species would keep learning new steps together.